Hi, my name is Phil. I'd like to talk about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss the possible exit strategies that will eventually be considered by the British government, as well as why they're not willing to discuss them right now. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, the government have been asked about exit strategies recently. We're over 2 weeks into the lockdown, and although most appreciate the moves to put lives ahead of the economy, we also know that we can't exist in this state forever. For some people, it will be hard enough to cope with any sense of normality for much longer, and many of us, of course, are going to be suffering financially as a result of this and will only be able to manage for so long. But ministers have been saying that they don't want to talk about exit strategies for fear of adding to the conclusion. Now, on that point, without at this point saying whether I agree or not, whether they should discuss exit strategies, people are going to talk about it anyway. I'm doing it right now. So I would suggest that ministers answering simple questions about it would remove from the confusion, quite frankly. Whenever the government are not willing to talk about something, others will throw their own hat into the ring into the terms of that public discussion, and you can get an awful lot of misinformation out there. So, is it that the government don't want us drawing a few conclusions based on likely exit strategies, for example? Or is it that they are still playing a very exhausting game of catch-up and haven't actually had serious discussions about it themselves? In other words, there is nothing to say about it. So let's go back to when this crisis was first making its way to our shores. So for the very first cases in the UK, people were quarantined and people they'd been in contact with were tracked down and also asked to quarantine. With a robust system of checks and testing and the rest of the population taking prescribed precautions, that can work. We've seen that can work. It's worked in South Korea most famously. But the UK then did something different. Not only did we not ramp up the testing, which is the only way to put such a plan into action, but Dominic Cummings changed the government response completely and decided on this herd immunity concept. Stop pinning down the infection and just let the bulk of the population become infected, and we'll come out of it the other end and everything will be marvellous. So this is what the government did. Naturally, it meant that the infection ran rampant, as it was initially the plan to do so. Then someone told the Prime Minister, a bit more about that person in a moment, that 250,000 people were going to die as a result of this plan cooked up by the master of misinformation and a eugenicist in the guise of our chief scientific advisor. Well, that's a lot of voters, thought the government. Let's maybe not do that after all. Problem is, at this point is the genie is out of the bottle. Now, simply quarantining and testing people who develop symptoms or those who'd come into contact with them was not going to work. So we ended up doing what most of Europe have done or are about to do and went into lockdown after several hundred deaths. The eventual aim is likely to be to use the lockdown and increased testing, which has to go hand in hand with it, to get the number of deaths down to close to zero and the number of new cases down to very manageable levels as well. At this point, you can go back to the original plan of quarantining those who develop symptoms until they can be tested and given the all clear, as well as tracking down people they've been in contact with to do likewise. With the general population still observing sensible precautions to limit their exposure to people where possible, that would allow us to phase our economy back into action. But if the government announced this, you can imagine the scenario. People will say, well, we could have done that from the start and avoided the need for the lockdown altogether. Indeed, we already were doing this very, very briefly until Cummings and Vallance deliberately opened up the floodgates without any proper consideration of the consequences. But that's just one possible reason why the government may not wish to talk about exit strategies right now. There are others, rather more understandable ones. So another is that getting life back to normal, as we understand it, may not be possible at all. That may be a bygone age. That we may have to fundamentally change the normal in order to get through this. There's also the problem that forming or getting back to any sense of normality, whether it's an old one or a new one, is going to mean much more testing. That there can be no emerging from this. We are told this, we know this, it makes sense as well. There can be no emerging from this without tracking the spread of the virus and containing it. That's just a fact. But we can't do that testing. Even if we wanted to, and it may well be that we now genuinely want to, that the government would like to, although I haven't seen any definitive proof of that, it's impossible. The government have sought to muddy the waters here by increasing their target for testing. So first of all, they talked about 10,000 a day, then 25,000 a day, now 100,000 a day. And it all gives the impression that they're moving through their target, but they're not. They haven't even met their first target yet. And our current target of 100,000 a day by the end of this month has been described as impossible. We don't have the facilities. Even if we accepted the offer of help from universities with biomedical testing facilities and staff, which the government reportedly refused last week, even though offered, we still couldn't get up to the 100,000 a day, so we're told. An advisor to the government on the pandemic, Professor Neil Ferguson, who is the man who led the team warning the government that there would be 250,000 dying as a result of his herd immunity ideas, said that we were going to have to adopt the South Korea model, that sort of mass testing with contact tracing. But it's not like even South Korea have their end in sight. The issue is we don't know what the exit strategy ultimately is because no country has yet achieved it. And that adds another complication to the concept of exit strategy. We can take our lead at long last, potentially, from countries who've been getting it right. But no country has yet come through the other side of this. There are just those who've managed it a lot better than we have. That's all. Finally, Professor Ferguson also noted the role of behaviour science in all this. And this is crucial. If we relax measures and then have to tighten them again, it'll be difficult for people to accept it, he says. And I definitely agree that no measures can work without the compliance of the general population. That's absolutely crucial. So a number of factors to consider when it comes to judging whether ministers are right or wrong to not discuss exit strategies. It'd be easier to come to a conclusion if we at least felt that the government were being open and honest with us. Sadly, that's not the case. So anyway, hopefully that's given you some food for thought. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, then please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.